everything they say about honey badgers is true. It looked like uh, a mean thug walking around just begging for somebody to step out so he could knock him out. It was absolutely the meanest looking little animal I've ever seen in my life.
Welcome to the Big Game Hunting Podcast, where we help hunters like you prepare for the big game hunting adventures you've always dreamed of. Now, here's your host, John McAdams.
Hello, John McAdams here, and you are listening to episode 373 of the Big Game Hunting Podcast. If you have been waiting for more Africa-related content, then I have good news for you. This is the first episode in my summer 2025 Africa hunting miniseries. My father, Kevin McAdams, joins me in this episode to discuss 3 African safaris where he used classic and indeed very unusual cartridges and rifles. We will, of course, discuss this in more detail during the show, but right off the bat, between the two of us, we used rifles chambered in .22 Hornet, .33 Winchester centerfire, 5.77 450 Martini Henry, 45.70, and 51.10 Winchester on those hunts. And, among many other things, we will discuss how those cartridges performed on several different species of plains game in Africa. Now, my father had the good fortune to hunt a wide spectrum of game in several very different parts of Africa on the 3 hunts we discuss in this episode. He also shares a few pretty interesting stories from those hunts involving animals like aardwolf, cheetah, mongoose, and owl that go well beyond some of the animals typically featured in African hunting stories. So there will be stuff in this episode for those who want to talk rifles and ballistics, and there will also be great stuff in this episode for those who like personal hunting stories and just hearing about Africa hunting in general. So let's dive right into all of that stuff with Kevin McAdams. Okay, good morning, Dad. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I've been excited about this interview since we first started talking about it a couple weeks ago.
Well, it's nice to be here.
Well, good. The first question I'm going to ask you is one that was submitted by a Patreon supporter of mine. I have always been curious if, as a kid, your father recognized anything in you, referring to me, that could have predicted where I am today insofar as my work in the firearms community. What do you think about that?
The answer to that is yes. When my father and I would go up to the property to do whatever, prepare deer blinds or feeders or work at the cabin, you always wanted to go with us. And contrary to what most kids do, you were very interested in the situation with setting up our situation as far as getting ready for the deer season, and you loved going to the woods.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, you did show a lot of interest in what we were doing. One of my favorite stories about you is when we were telling you all summer, now when we go hunting, you're not old enough to go with us, so you're not going to be going when we go up there for deer season. And when my dad showed up at my house to pick me up that morning to go up there, you came down and you were still in your sleeping clothes, and you said, "Where are you guys going?" And we set up to the property to go deer hunting, and you immediately turned and ran away and said, "I'll be right back." And I looked at my dad and I said, "Are you going to tell him he can't go?" And he said, "Nope, I guess we're stuck with him."
And here we are all these years later. I'm glad that you guys let me go on that trip and fostered that desire in me.
Yes, well, we certainly enjoyed having you with us. You were a good companion, always good for a laugh.
Yeah, definitely. So, today we're talking primarily about Africa. Now, you were the first person that I knew well that hunted in Africa and kind of got me interested in doing that myself. So what was it that made you first want to hunt Africa?
I think from the time I was probably 15 years old or so, I've always wanted to go hunt large dangerous animals. And the two choices was to go to Alaska or go to Africa. And Africa offered a lot more variety and a lot more reasonable uh, cost to go hunting. And so that's why I really studied up hard on the various situations as far as animals to hunt and the cost of hunting and stuff like that.
Now, I remember probably I was a teenager when this memory occurred, but you had sat down and you really started doing serious research on, okay, what's it going to cost for me to go to Kamchatka, Russia to hunt a brown bear? What's it going to cost for me to go to Alaska to do that or to hunt a moose there? Okay, what can I hunt plains game in Africa for? What's it going to cost to hunt Cape buffalo? And you were shocked at one, how expensive a hunt in Alaska was, or in Russia, or in Europe. And at the same time, you were shocked in a good way about how much more reasonably priced a hunt in Africa was, even for something like Cape buffalo.
Yes. I found that I could go actually several trips to Africa for what it would cost one trip to go to Alaska and hunt a big bear.
Mm-hmm. Now, things, of course, are more expensive now than your first hunt in Africa 20 years ago, but I think that still is true. A plains game hunt in Africa in particular remains one of the best bargains in the outfitted big game hunting world anyway. You went on your first hunt to Namibia in 2005. I had never heard of the country of Namibia until you decided that you wanted to hunt there. And like a lot of people, initially when I looked at it, I thought it was Nambia, not Namibia.
Yeah.
There's a Zambia, there's a Gambia, but there's no Nambia in Africa. What made you select Namibia over any other country?
Well, primarily, you got to hunt a lot of interesting different animals for a very reasonable cost. And I sent out letters to many uh, setups there in Namibia and found that there was a tremendous variety of animals you could hunt at a very reasonable cost. And I finally decided on two particular ones that stood out and booked that. And I was very glad I did.
Yeah, so 20 years ago, I think Namibia has always been a place, or maybe say in the last 50 years, it's been a place where a lot of Europeans in particular hunted there, a lot of Germans in particular due to its status as a former German colony. And I think you got into hunting in Namibia right as the Americans were starting to discover the hunting market there. And I think it's gotten more expensive since then, and it's not as good of a bargain as it was back then, but it's still a good bargain. And and you and I had you had multiple great hunts there. I had one great hunt there with you that I went on. So tell us about these hunts. We'll start with your first hunt. You went in 2005 with Mom. You went 2006 with me, and then you went back in 2009 and you hunted with my cousin Brian. So let's start with that 2005 hunt. So first, what did you plan on hunting? And then we could talk about the outfitters. We could talk about the guns that you used, and then the story of the actual hunt.
Well, Namibia has very nice oryx, Gimsbach, red hartebeest, blue wildebeest, uh, eland, and kudu. And all of those were very reasonably priced. And I decided on two different places that I wanted to go and kind of split between the two. Oh, also tons of warthogs. You just were always seeing warthogs. And the other animals, there were lots of them. I can remember one time seeing 5 big kudu bulls. We hadn't been gone from the Dirk's house more than 5 minutes and saw these in one herd. So it was a tremendous quantity of game that you got to see every day. It was very enjoyable.
And so you went with two different outfitters that were located in two completely different parts of the country. And so we could talk a little bit more about that in a second, because I think the terrain and conditions were very different in those areas. But you, being the guy you are, you did not make traditional rifle choices for any of these hunts. So tell us first what rifles and cartridges you brought on your first hunt.
Well, on my very first hunt, I brought a Winchester high wall, which my wife had made for me specially for a birthday present, and it was chambered in 5110 Winchester. And it was actually made by not by Winchester. It was a newly made rifle, but absolutely beautiful workmanship. And I brought that one. And then I also brought an original Winchester 1886 and 33 Winchester. And I always enjoyed hand loading for these oddball calibers, the old guns. So the 5110 I had loaded with 440 grain woodley bullets at about 1,700 feet per second. And the 33 I had loaded with 250 grain original Winchester silver tip bullets at about 2,000 feet per second.
So you say Winchester silver tip bullets. So were those the metal capped silver tip bullets?
Yeah, the original silver tips that have been around since the 1930s.
Yes. Okay. So yeah. So these were some very old bullets that you used in a cartridge that were even older than those bullets were.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing about these rifle choices is neither one of these rifles you had a scope on it. So you hunted with iron sights on actually all of these hunts. We'll talk how that played into how things actually occurred over there on these hunts. But so, what was it that made you choose these particular rifles instead of bringing a scope 30-06 or something over?
Well, it's just what I enjoyed hunting with. Uh, I can probably count on one hand the number of times I've hunted with a rifle that had a scope on it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tried to seek out rifles when I was buying original rifles that had come from the factory with Lyman peep sights, which were available on pretty much any rifle you bought back in those days. Uh, they could come from the factory with the aperture sights on them.
Mm-hmm. And so that's what you had on these rifles. Okay, so you've kind of set the stage for why you went with Namibia, why you took these rifles, all of that stuff. Generally, what you were targeting. So you and Mom decided that you were going to go on this trip together. Very briefly, give us an overview of the hunt, and then we can talk about a couple of especially memorable parts of it.
Well, we got there, got picked up at the airport, taken out. It was about a 3 hour drive out to the farm. And we started off bright and early the next morning. And almost immediately we started seeing animals. And the first animal I took was a really nice oryx or gemsbok. And I shot that with the high wall in 50 caliber.
Mm-hmm.
The animal was laying down at about a 45-degree angle to me, and I shot it in the chest, and the bullet exited out through in front of the right rear leg.
Mm-hmm. So how did you guys spot that animal and get up close to it for a shot and all of that stuff? And about how far was the shot?
Well, we were just walking. The terrain was kind of rolling, and we were walking along glassing and whatnot, and saw a group of them. And apparently, they weren't terribly skittish of us. And we just worked our way into about 60 yards. And I sat down and got a steady position and shot her, and everything was cool after that.
Oh, very interesting. So you shot this oryx sitting.
Yes, I just sat down, comfortable shooting position, and shot her. It actually was a female, but They had really nice horns on her.
Now, is this the oryx that is a shoulder mount in your den?
That's correct. Yeah, that was my first African animal.
Yeah, that is a really nice 40+ inch oryx that you have.
Yeah, she was really pretty.
Yeah, so I remember showing people the photo of that oryx, and they're all like, "Why'd he shoot it in the butt?" And I was like, "He didn't shoot it in the butt. That's an exit wound from where he shot it in front of the other shoulder."
Yeah, everybody, that's the first thing they talk about when they see pictures of it.
Now, this first outfitter that you hunted with, Waldo, do I understand right that he was more southerly located in the country, and it was more of a desert or semi-arid type terrain that you were hunting in?
Yes, it was rather more dry, I guess you would say, more like southern Arizona, and fairly not too many trees, not too many bushes, fairly rocky, but apparently still has plenty of ability to support a lot of nice animals. The second place I hunted up was further north, and I think it was a little higher elevation, probably got a little bit more moisture. So it had a little more bushes, a little more trees, and was not quite as rolling. It was a little flatter.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, what else did you end up taking with Waldo on that part of the hunt?
I shot a springbok, and I shot that with the 33, and we were walking along, and it jumped up out of some bushes and stopped to look at us, and it was about 90 yards away. And my first shot went over it, and the second shot nailed it, and it just dropped right in its tracks.
Yeah, so you shot right over the back, and the springbok didn't do anything; it just stood there looking at you.
Yeah, just kind of trying to figure out what that funny sound was, and I just fired a second shot, and I kind of think I probably pulled the first shot due to excitement,
Mm-hmm.
but the second shot just dropped in its tracks.
All right. Now you also shot a kudu in this area too, right?
Yes, he had a 7 millimeter Magnum with a scope on it, and we were down at the base of a very large hill and real thick brush, and the kudu we saw up on the side of the hill, it was probably close to 200 yards. And he said, "Here, Kevin, take my rifle and shoot that kudu." And so I propped it on a fence post and put the crosshairs right under its chin and fired, and it just disappeared into the brush. And he said, "Damn, I think you got it." And we climbed this really steep hill, and the shot had gone in just underneath his jaw and out the back of his neck, and he just dropped like a sack of potatoes. And uh, he admitted to me later, he said he fully expected me to miss that shot. And I said, "Well, thanks. I appreciate, I appreciate your confidence in me."
Now you, if I am remembering correctly, you have since shot a nicer kudu that we'll talk about later, but that this was also a pretty darn nice kudu itself.
Yeah, this one was pretty decent. Yes.
All right, so you wrapped up your hunt down there with Waldo, and then went and hunted with a second outfitter, Dirk, in a more northern part of Namibia. And so, like you mentioned earlier, it was all of Namibia is pretty dry for the most part, outside of the Caprivi. But the first area you hunted was very dry, a little bit more open, and then you moved up north where it got a little bit more rain. We think a little bit higher elevation, more vegetation in general there. And so it was two different hunts within the same country. Tell us a little bit about that part of the trip.
Dirk was raised on the property and was a diesel mechanic, and decided he wanted to move back to the family farm and become a guide. So he got his professional license and whatnot, and I was one of the first people to hunt with him when he got his license. And the first animal we set up on the edge of a dry lake bed that was on his property, and a real nice large warthog came trotting by, and we were both sitting in this ground blind, and probably about 100 yards, I shot that with the high wall, and it went about 20 yards and fell over, and so we got off to a good start. I think he was kind of dubious of the fact that I did not have scopes, so he was pleasantly surprised that I was able to shoot it and not just wound it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that was a nice warthog you ended up getting with Dirk. And what else did you end up getting in that part of the hunt? I think you ended up shooting a massive blue wildebeest with Dirk as well with your 50.
Oh, you're right. I had forgot about that. Yes. It was a really nice one. In fact, he thought it might actually make the record books, but it didn't quite make it. And it was kind of trotting toward us, and we were just squatting down behind a little bush. And I shot it, and the bullet passed through the lower part of the heart. And he kind of stumbled and actually looked like a boxer out on his feet, but refusing to go down. And I reloaded, and I was just getting ready to shoot him again when he went down permanently. And yeah, it was a really nice, big blue wildebeest.
Yeah, so it may be kind of a toss up between which was the quote unquote best animal of that first hunt between that wildebeest and that gemsbok.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were both really nice.
So you had a heck of a hunt there. You and then you were kind of a minor celebrity among your friends and whatnot back in the United States that had never known anyone that to hunt Africa before.
Yeah.
And you made real good relationships with both of your PHs, and in fact, you had so much fun that you and I went back together in 2006. And so on that hunt, I brought my Martini Henry that you helped me get set up for. That was a college graduation present from your parents, my grandparents. And then I brought my Marlin 1895 and 4570, and you spun up some hand loads for that with a 300 grain Nosler partition. And then, of course, you also went on this hunt and hunted again. What did you bring on that second trip?
Okay, I think I took my 1886 extra light rifle and 4570, which my parents had given to me for a graduation present from high school. And I had it loaded with 405 grain Remington bullets, the same bullets that they used in their factory shells. But I had boosted the velocity to about 1,600 feet per second versus about 1,300 for the factory loads. And I also brought a Winchester Model 43, which had belonged to my father and was the first center 5 rifle that he had ever owned. And he killed his first deer with it in 1953. And I shot a blackback jackal and a warthog with it. And my dad was very happy to see the pictures we took of the last two animals that had been shot with his old rifle. And it was
Shoot it.
22 Hornet.
Yeah, shooting a jackal with a 22 Hornet, very typical use for it. Wouldn't be surprising to anybody. But the performance of that 22 Hornet on the warthog, I was a little bit surprised at, and I have since heard from many people that have killed a lot more warthog than you and I that pound for pound, warthog are a pretty darn tough animal, and they're not especially big animals, but I mean they could take a lot before going down. So tell us briefly the story of that warthog and the 22 Hornet.
Well, if I remember correctly, this warthog was on the side of the road and decided to cross the road and run into the bushes. And before it could get cranked up and moving, I shot it, and it ran across the road into some brush. And It took it a little while to die, less than a minute, but he was pretty scrappy there for a while. Managed to get up into some real thick brush and whatnot, and he was kind of hard to get out of there. But using Remington, old Remington factory loads with a hollow point bullet, and they did quite well.
Do you recall if that bullet exited the warthog?
No, I don't think it did.
Mm-hmm. Now, you also brought your 5110 on this hunt too. Was that was the same high wall that you brought in 2005, right?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. All right. All right. So we went on this hunt together July 2006. And I think we followed the same travel itinerary that you did when you went the previous year. Flew from Houston to Frankfurt, had a 12-hour layover in Frankfurt, and then flew from Frankfurt down to Windhoek. Dirk picked us up there, about a 3-hour drive to his farm in the northern part of the country. And if I recall right, we got in, say, like actually got to his place, say early afternoon, something like that, had lunch, went hunting, and then we got in the truck and drove out to where we were going to hunt. And man, I remember thinking while we were driving, it's like, gosh, this is like right out of the movie Hatari. We're driving down the road, and I remember like a mother warthog and a couple of babies like came out of the bush and ran alongside the truck for 20 or 30 yards, and then they turned and ran back into the bush. And then we saw springbok and wildebeest and red hartebeest and all of that stuff. And I'm like, my goodness, like we've been out here less than 30 minutes, and I've already seen more animals than I normally do in an entire season of deer hunting. And kind of like you, I also got, or you on your first hunt, I also got off to a fast start on this hunt. We get to where we were going to go, and I mean, we barely gotten out of the truck and started hunting, and then boom, this big warthog comes out, and I shoot him with the Martini Henry at like 100 yards, maybe a little bit further, and I just center punched him on the shoulder, and he took off running into the bushes, and and that was it. Went maybe 50 yards after the shot, and gigantic warthog that I ended up shooting. Namibia has a system now that they instituted very recently called their age-related trophy measurement system, where they give an animal a bonus if it's a big animal, or excuse me, if it's an old animal, and then they penalize it if it is a young animal.
Mm-hmm.
And then if it's a prime age, then it's just the whatever the score is for it. So they score it the normal way, and then apply a multiplier to it based upon how old it was. And that was a big old warthog. And as I record this, that warthog is number 3 in the Namibian record books now because it was so old and big. So that was, like I said, that's first afternoon there. I'm thinking, man, this is amazing. I've never been to a place like this before.
Yes, it definitely spoils you as far as the number of animals you'll see in a day.
Now, we did kind of a mix of hunting 1-on-1 and 2-on-1 with Dirk on that hunt. So I was with you for some of the hunt and not on other parts. Like you were with me when I got that that warthog, and then you shot a 3-horned kudu, also I think pretty early in that hunt with your 45-70, right?
Yes, we were all 3 of us in a blind, elevated blind, if I remember correctly, and I ended up shooting this kudu. And when we got up there and started looking at it, it's got a real small horn, but only about an inch long, inch and a half maybe, sticking right out of his forehead in between his other 2 horns. And I had heard, I don't know if this is true, but there's only been 2 of them killed in Namibia like that.
Oh, wow. That is interesting. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's funny that on this trip, you and I were both hunting with rifles that your parents had given us. You had that 45-70 that your parents gave you as a high school graduation present. And then I had that Martini Henry that your parents also gave me as a college graduation present. So that was really cool that we were able to do that. But like you on that first hunt and on the second hunt, I also brought 2 rifles over that also did not have scopes on them. So I was doing all of this hunting with iron sights. Any other notable parts of that hunt that you think are worth sharing with the audience?
Well, maybe the cheetah.
Yeah.
All three of us were in a blind, and normally the eland and whatnot will come in the afternoon to drink, and for some reason they weren't coming in that day, and Dirk was very perplexed. He didn't know why. And then after sitting there for about an hour or so, here comes this big male cheetah kind of patrolling down the fence line looking for stuff. And it was didn't take but just 2 or 3 seconds. I got the 45-70 up and shot him, and he just plopped over on his side and never even kicked after that. And Namibia is the only country that I'm aware of that has enough cheetah that they're legal to hunt. And this one was a big old scruffy male. His fur was all scruffed up and had burrs all tangled in him and everything. He was kind of a rough looking character, but that was pretty much of a highlight there to actually take a cheetah.
Yeah, that was pretty wild, and that was not at all what I expected, because I remember, sitting there with you, and we could see a group of eland just right on the edge of visibility in the bush. We could see them, but we could see them moving around out there, but they were way too far to shoot or really even identify a specific animal or any of that stuff. And so they really wanted to come in, but I'm sure they smelled that cheetah or something, and it was making them very nervous. And actually, on that same afternoon before the cheetah came out, an aardwolf came out.
Yes.
And yeah, I had never even heard of an aardwolf, didn't even know what it was until we saw it there. And then I had to look it up later to see what the deal with it was. That's a very interesting looking animal.
In fact, we also got to see. I think it might have been a mongoose catch a bird.
Mm-hmm.
He laid up next to the edge of this water tank, and birds would come down and light on the edge of it, drink some water, and then fly away. And one of them made the mistake of landing a little too close to him, and boy, he pounced on it, and it made one little crack, and then it was gone dead, and he took off with it to eat his supper. That was pretty interesting being able to see that.
Yeah, all three of those things happened the same afternoon. So we saw the mongoose get the dove, we saw the aardwolf, and then we saw the cheetah. And that was all right at the end of the hunt. And actually, I don't know if it was that day or not, but it was also around that time. And in a similar situation on an afternoon one day, you had the encounter with the owl in the in the blind. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember that. We were both pretty shocked by that.
Yeah, so we're sitting in this blind, and it's more long, or it's more wide than it is long. It was so for the listener to picture this, you could easily have four people sitting in a row next to each other, looking out of this blind at this water hole, and there was a door on one side, so we'd climb up a ladder, go in the door, and then all file in and sit down, and then at the far end there was a window, a little square window, and then in front of us there was a long, skinny window where all four people, if they were in there, they could have their rifles shooting out of it if they so chose. We got into this blind, and I recall seeing bird poop in it, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because we'd been in several other ones, and I don't recall seeing that in any of the other ones. So we get in there. I think you got in first,
Yeah,
and
I was
then
on the far left. Yeah.
you were on the far end, and then Dirk and me were sitting there. And you want to tell what happened next?
Well, I went to look out the small hole in the end of the blind, just about the time the owl decided to land there and come home and take a rest, and scared the bejesus out of both of us when he tried to land there.
Yeah, you went and then the owl went
Yeah,
and it flew out,
yeah.
and then Dirk and I almost fell out of the blind because we were laughing so so darn hard at that. But yeah, I think that owl had a nice spot there where it was getting towards dark, and I wonder if that owl was coming into the blind and was going to sit there and use it as a perch,
Yeah.
to see a mouse or whatever coming into that water hole when it got dark. And at least at that instant, we had ruined his hunting plans there.
Yeah.
Yeah, so between that and the aardwolf and the mongoose, those were all very memorable parts of that hunt that had nothing to do with anybody shooting anything.
Yeah, there's lots of interesting stuff that goes on that make for some interesting conversation later.
Now, on this same hunt, we spent most of that time on Dirk's farm hunting the usual suspects there, like you talked about. He had great hunting for um, Gemsbach, great hunting for eland, also a lot of nice kudu, red hartebeest, wildebeest, that sort of stuff. But Namibia, in addition to being the only place I know of anywhere where you can hunt cheetah, you can also hunt mountain zebra in that place, which is also unique to Namibia. So we spent a couple of days at a different farm, a couple of hours away. Tell us a little bit about the mountain zebra part of the hunt.
Well, the terrain is totally different there. Fairly steep hills, large boulders, a fair amount of water, so there's good cover and whatnot for the animals. But they have a very good population of mountain zebras. And the way they normally hunt them was in a vehicle, just kind of patrolling. And we got out of the truck at one point, and there were some zebras that had not seen us, kind of angling toward us. And I shot the biggest one with the 50 cal, and the bullet had ended up going through the heart, but the zebra was pretty tough. It took off running, and this led to one of my more interesting memories of the hunt, where you told me that the guy who was tracking the zebra told you to keep an eye out around us while he was staring at the ground, because a wounded zebra can be pretty mean and actually attack you. And I had never heard such a thing, but we ended up finding it, and so we had a nice mountain zebra.
Yeah, that was my first experience with zebras, and I have since learned that zebra in general are they can be very aggressive. They're always fighting each other. And that one that you ended up getting, he was covered in scars. I think both from the vegetation and from fighting with other zebras, nipping at each other and whatnot. Yeah, so that was a much more physically demanding area to hunt, much rougher terrain, higher elevation, and I started getting sick at this part of the trip too. So that was a doubly difficult time for me. I've had very, very severe GI issues. I came down with some very bad traveler's diarrhea while we were there. And so, man, I remember being really dehydrated and trying to hike out in the sun and all of that stuff on that terrain and just being absolutely miserable while we were out there. And yeah, at one point, we had been, walking, like we were on the trail of the zebra, and then we kind of come up on a rise, and then there was a little valley, and then another rise several hundred yards away, and then there was a herd of maybe 10 or 20 mountain zebra running away on that rise, and the tracker was like, okay, yeah, there's your zebra, shoot it. And that thing was like 400 yards away. I was like, man, there's no way I'm going to be able to shoot these zebra. That was my iron sighted 4570. And we stayed on their trail. And I don't know if it was those zebra or some other ones, probably some other ones at a little bit different area that we eventually got you on. And you ended up shooting one with your 50. And if I remember right, that was the zebra, or that was the animal that you shot it with your 50. And the bullet, I think, grazed one of the ribs and shaved off a piece of it, and it kind of broke the bullet in two, and like it was like a quarter sized fragment of that bullet went straight into the heart, and then the rest of the bullet deflected and went into the stomach. And it was a good shot, but the bullet just kind of deflected and did weird things, and it was that quarter sized fragment of it that you recovered later that was what had actually killed it.
Yeah, and that's why it did not just drop. It ran away before finally cashing in its chips.
Do you recall what type of Woodley bullet this was that you were using?
That was just a regular 50 caliber, 440 grain, with what they call their thin jacket. It's about 32 thousandths, I believe, thick. And normally it works really good, but in this case, it did split open like that.
Yeah, so it was an interesting thing that both you and I were dealing with on this hunt. Me, especially with my Martini Henry, and then you with both of yours, but especially with the 50, where we were using lower velocity cartridges, and so you needed a setup with your bullet that was soft enough that it would expand with a 1,600 foot per second impact velocity, but also tough enough that it wouldn't just go to pieces like that. And that was a line both you and I were walking. And I don't know that you had any issues, but I do recall I shot my kudu with my Martini Henry, and we recovered the bullet from it, and that bullet did not expand at all. Like the side of it was a little bit kind of caved in and stuff, and it was a little smushed down. But it was not. It just wasn't going fast enough. I think to have any expansion or upset with it.
Yes, that's you can't have everything with a bullet when you accept compromises like that, but you just got to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that Martini Henry, I was pushing those 400 grain bullets, 1350, maybe 1400 feet per second. And that's the nice thing about a big 45 caliber slug like that is it does make a big hole, even though it's not expanding much or at all. I shot one into ballistic gel here recently, and it did literally nothing. Penetration was fantastic, but the bullet went like 2 feet and then tumbled and then continued the rest of the way base forward and then came to a rest. And you could have almost loaded that bullet back into another cartridge and shot it again. It had rifling marks on it, but that was about it.
Yeah.
But I don't think we could. Actually, I know when we were doing our load development for it that we could not safely push that bullet any faster out of it without potentially damaging the gun with excess pressure. And so we had the choice where we can use a cast lead bullet like they originally designed that cartridge for, and that might be too soft. Or we could go with what we did was that Hawk custom bullet, 400 grain bullet that we made for it with as thin of a jacket as they could make, and hopefully that would work. And it did, even though it wasn't expanding or anything. I mean, I did not have any issues with anything I shot on that hunt not going down quickly with good shot placement because the bullet wasn't working right. Mm-hmm. And I imagine it was probably a similar deal with you with that 50 cal. Did you recover any bullets from your 5110 on any of these hunts?
I think that sliver was the only piece that I ever recovered. I don't think I recovered a complete bullet.
Yeah. I think we. Well, I mean, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I mean, the first story you told, you got full body penetration on that Oryx.
Right.
And I mean, Oryx are big and they're tough. And, kudu and zebra and wildebeest and whatnot are all kind of in that similar size and toughness range. But yeah, if you're going all the way through a Gemsbach like that, I don't know that even on something really big, you're going to stop it like on a broadside shoulder shot or something.
Mm-hmm.
We did recover, I think, one of your bullets from the 4570 that you shot that kudu with, and that was cool. And I shot red hartebeest with my 4570 with an Osler partition, and we recovered that. It broke both of his shoulders and was just all mangled to pieces, but it still had that classic partition type shape. It was just bent and broken and everything, but it also did a number on that hartebeest.
One thing I did do of interest, the Winchester years ago used to make what was called a copper tube bullet. Basically, it was a hollow point bullet, and it had a copper tube with the open end pointed down, pushed into the hole in the nose of the bullet. So it looked like it had a copper cap on the end of it. And they did that to enhance the expansion of the fairly low velocity bullet. And I actually made some of those on the lathe that we have or used to have, and shot a red hartebeest with that. And it did the absolute classic, beautiful big expansion and bulged the hide on the opposite side. So you could just cut it out of the hide. And it was a beautiful mushroom very large and penetrated completely through, but stopped in the body. And so all of that was what is considered, I guess, perfect performance for a hunting bullet.
Yeah, especially a big bore, slow velocity cartridge like that you're using on plains game. I'm sure you wouldn't want to shoot a buffalo or something with that bullet, but great on hartebeest like you use it on.
Yeah.
And that was the hartebeest you shot on this hunt that I was with you?
Yes, sure was. And the factory loads for the 50 Black Powder Express had a lead bullet they were a lead bullet with a very deep copper gas check and a copper tube. And so they worked great for plains animal, but obviously, like you said, they were not suitable for buffalo, but they enhanced the expansion for the low velocity, and they worked quite well.
Yeah, so for the listener that doesn't know what he's talking about, my dad has a double rifle in 50 Black Powder Express that he's wanted to use for buffalo, and my dad being a tinkerer and a hand loader and just liking to do things like that, had made some of these bullets for his 5110 and then got some factory loads and whatnot for his 50 Black Powder Express. I need to shoot some of those into ballistic gel. I'm very curious to see how they would perform in that medium, and it'd be interesting to shoot an animal with those as well. I'm sure they'd perform very similarly to the one you made yourself.
Yes, I would be interested in seeing that also.
So all in all, that was a great hunt. I ended up taking, let me think here, warthog, kudu, red hartebeest, springbok, and gemsbok on that hunt. And that warthog was really cool. The kudu was also really, really awesome. I had, let's see here. So this was a part of the hunt where you and I had split up, and I was walking with Dirk that morning, and we were just walking. He did a really good job, I think, of tailoring the way he did things to each of our abilities, and he would push things further and faster with me because I was 21 at the time and in fantastic shape. And I don't know what you were doing that morning or anything, but he took me on a long walkabout through the bush, and we, I think, had gone to a water hole, seen where a kudu had drank. He's like, okay, these are nice tracks. This is a bull that's worth following up. And then we just got on him and walked. And we walked that kudu down that morning. And I think we had found him on his way away from the water hole. And he had been stopping and browsing and eating breakfast and everything. And so he wasn't going very fast. And we caught up to him, and the wind was good. And we all of a sudden kind of got up to an open area, and there was a kudu that was kind of on one edge of it, and he saw us, and he took off running and ran across it, and then stopped kind of half in the bushes on the other side, looking back at us. And Dirk had told me while he was running, he says, get ready to shoot. He might stop and look back at us, and if he does, that's when you're going to do it. And we didn't have shooting sticks or anything. I just rested my rifle on Dirk's shoulder, and that kudu stopped exactly like he said it would, and boom, I popped him right in the shoulder with a Martini Henry. And he took off running, and I heard that bullet hit with just a loud whack. And he ran, less than 50 yards later, we found him laying there. And I was like, that was the thing that I wanted the most on that hunt, was a really nice kudu. And by God, I got it on that. I had to work hard for it. I put in some miles over the course of several days looking for that kudu. But I got a great looking kudu with a really cool classic rifle like that. Can't be too many kudu in the last 100 years that people have killed with a Martini Henry in Namibia. So that was the highlight of my hunt.
Yes, that was overall a very good hunt. A lot of fun.
Well, so that was 2006, July. Went back home, had a great trip. Always wanted to go back and do it again. And, you, I think, had always had the idea that you wanted to go, I think, initially for plains game to Africa, and then go back at a later time and hunt buffalo. So you did that in 2009. Now, I don't want to delve too much into the buffalo side of the hunt because things did not go, let's just say, anywhere close to how you pictured them with that. But in addition to your buffalo hunt in the Caprivi Strip of Namibia, You had also planned a return trip to hunt with Dirk, to hunt plains game with my cousin Brian, your nephew, Brian. And I know you did a little bit of hunting on that trip as well, but it was mainly him that was hunting on it. Tell us a little bit about that trip and what I guess first, what rifle did you end up bringing on that hunt?
I had a Model 71 Winchester that I had been rebarreled to 5110, and I brought that. That's what I was going to use on the buffalo, but that didn't work out. So I think that was the only gun I had.
Now, for those that don't know, tell them what a Model 71 Winchester is.
Okay, a Model 71 Winchester is just a, a modernized version of the 1886. And Winchester brought it out in 348 Winchester caliber. And that means that the bolt face and the feed mechanism and everything will work with what was originally the 5110. Basically, the 348 was a 5110 case that had been necked down to 348 caliber. And so I had this gun was rebarreled and fixed up to look like an 1886, but was all more modern steel and everything.
Now actually I don't know that we talked about this. So in your first two hunts, you brought a Winchester 1885 high wall, which is a single shot rifle. So you
Correct.
had one of these. It was a modern reproduction of an 1885 in 5110 Winchester, right?
The single shot was a reproduction. Yes, it was made by Ballard Rifle Company. Very, very high quality people. They really produce some beautiful guns. And I'd always liked the high wall single shot. And so my wife actually had one built up for me.
Yeah, that is a beautiful rifle, among other things, beautiful color case hardening on it too.
Yeah, it's a very, very, very high quality gun.
Okay, so you had that model 1885 single shot. You took that on the first two hunts, and I know you had considered using that on the buffalo, but you decided you wanted a repeater to use on the buffalo, so you had this modified Model 71. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but Winchester did make the 1886 in 5110 as well. Are those just very, very rare, expensive rifles to find?
Yes, and finding one in the condition that this gun was in would have been extremely expensive and maybe impossible. There are not too many of them that are in that great a condition after being used hard for all those years.
Yeah, because I mean the 5110 was originally designed as a black powder cartridge. So as is the case with many rifles that fired black powder, it's common, especially if they were used as a working gun. It's very common for them to be in kind of rough shape with a lot of pitting in the bore and yada yada yada. So that's why you went the route you did with the Model 71. So you took a 5110 rifle on all three of your hunts, but it was just two different rifles.
That's correct. Yeah.
All right. So tell us a little bit about this 2009 hunt.
Well, that particular gun I had loaded with Barnes original bullets, which are a conventional jacketed bullet with a lead core, and they made a 50 caliber bullet in 450 grains. And I ended up shooting an oryx in the neck with one of these bullets, and the darn thing expanded out to almost as big around as a quarter. And of course, it broke the animal's neck instantly, and down he went. But that was the only animal I ended up having a chance to shoot with it.
To further emphasize that point, you said this bullet expanded to a massive diameter and killed the animal quickly, but did not exit a neck shot on a Gemsbach.
Yeah, and that'll give you an idea how tough African animals are. That would have, I think, blasted clean through a neck on an elk or something like that with no problem.
Yeah, possibly. All right, so tell us a little bit about Brian's experience on that hunt.
Well, Brian I think he shot a really nice kudu. And the best thing about the hunt, I think, was the fact that he killed a caracal. And I've seen two caracal in all my hunting over there, and both of them, it was just the tail that was as it was disappearing into the bushes.
Mm-hmm.
They're very sneaky and hard to see, much less get a shot on. So I think that was pretty cool that he managed to do that. And like I said, he shot the kudu, and he shot a really nice oryx. And he missed a shot on a red hartebeest because his scope had failed internally and would not hold a zero. So he ended up stalking these animals for a good long while and got a decent shot, but just flat missed because the scope was screwed up on the gun.
Yeah. So Brian came over separately from you, and he flew through South Africa. So you went. So there's really two ways to get to Namibia from the United States. You can go through Europe, like you did through Frankfurt, or you can go through South Africa, which is what Brian did. So he flew to South Africa, spent the night there, and then took a flight the next morning into Windhoek. And when he did that, his rifle case made it, but his other bag with all of his clothes and all of his ammo did not. And so I remember you told me that when you guys picked him up at the airport, you had to stop at a gun store, and you were able to find some 45-70. And he brought he had a Marlin 1895 like I did, but he had instead of using iron sights like me, he had kind of a low quality scope on it. He also had a CZ 550 and 9.3 by 62. And you're able to find ammo for both of them at this random gun store. And I'm not surprised that you found the 9.3 ammo. I was a little surprised you found 45-70 ammo. It was plain old PPU soft points, I think you said, for the 9.3. And things went great with the 9.3 on that hunt. I mean, he killed everything with one shot. Very happy with that. Just boom, 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 boom. And then I don't know what kind of scope he had on that rifle, but it was something nicer. And everything was working great. And he really wanted to get something with that 45-70. But like you said, the scope broke on him, and it was just really frustrating. He'd miss an animal. You guys would go to the shooting range and check his zero, and it'd be way off. Adjust the zero, put it back on, shoot again, and then it'd be shooting 3 feet high or something like that. And I think he just ended up having to give up on the 45-70 on that hunt, didn't he?
Yeah, that's true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that was a good deal, and I remember you telling me that he maybe we talk about the buffalo hunt some other time, but that was turned into an absolute disaster, and I know you're really upset about that. But you said the best part about that whole trip was getting to hunt with Brian, and so that was 3 trips that you had made over, and each time you had gone with a different person. That was their first trip over there too. Your first trip over with Mom was first trip for both of you, and then my first was your second, and then your third was Brian's first. And so you got to see, that wonderment and amazement the first time going to Africa and everything with all of us. And I know, he still has fond memories about that hunt to this day as well.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was a good time.
And to your point about the caracal, I've been to Africa 6 times now, and I have not seen a single caracal. and he ended up shooting one on his first trip over. I think you told me on the trip you and I were there together, you were hunting separately from me, and you saw a honey badger one day, right?
Yes. And everything they say about honey badgers is true. It looked like a mean thug walking around just begging for somebody to step out so he could knock him out. It was absolutely the meanest looking little animal I've ever seen in my life. It was very, very interesting, and I'm glad he was about 50 yards away and not close, because he looked like he was pretty darn fast too.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is those are 3 stories of 3 very interesting hunts and some very diverse, memorable parts of each one. Any advice, anything that you learned in general from any of these hunts that, you wish you would have known prior to going over, or that you would tell someone before they make their first trip over?
Read carefully all the information you get on how to carry a gun on an airliner, and make sure you're hooking up with a good, honest, booking hunter. I don't think you'll have any issues. Namibia is very stable politically, and English is their primary language, so you don't have any trouble communicating. So it's just a very nice place to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was a very good hunt that I had with you, and I always will treasure the memories of that hunt, and I'm glad that we got to do that together. So as we wrap up this interview and put aside the Africa stuff today, I'm going to ask you the question that I'm asking every single person I bring on the show today. You must hunt for the rest of your life with either a single cartridge, but if you choose a single cartridge, you can use any bullet in it, or you must hunt with a single bullet that you can use in any cartridge. What is your choice?
Well, I'm a little bit of oddball, but I would definitely go with the 9.3 by 62. The 9.3 by 62 is the smallest legal caliber in most countries to hunt buffalo, but it's definitely able to bring one down, as you can attest to. And the original H-mantle bullet is just absolutely deadly on any of your plains game.
Yeah, so I mean, between you and me, just with the H-mantle bullet, I have killed white-tailed deer, feral hog, black bear, impala, and zebra. And I think your bag with that is similar, though you haven't killed a bear with it, have you?
No.
Yeah.
But I did kill really a nice big zebra with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would not use that bullet on a buffalo, but I would use it on anything smaller than a buffalo, and the performance was fantastic. Great expansion, just like you've described elsewhere. It's like a hand grenade going off in the chest cavity, and then the base of the bullet still exits out the other side. So you get an exit wound, and then you get massive internal damage to the animal. But it doesn't blow a giant hole out the other side either, which is also really nice.
Yeah, it's just a very good all-around caliber.
Yeah, that's a great bullet to use in a great cartridge. And that's a story for another day, but I have used and you're very similar. I've used the 9.3 to take game literally ranging from white-tailed deer and small hogs up to and including elephant with that cartridge. So it's that is an awesome deal, especially when you're able to get it in a left-handed rifle like you and I each have.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Dad, thank you so much for joining me on the show today. I really enjoyed this conversation and going down memory lane with you.
Well, I enjoyed it too. I appreciate it.
Okay, I hope you enjoyed that. Sometimes it's fun to just go against the grain, bring an unusual rifle, an unusual cartridge, or something like that on a hunt. That's especially true if that particular rifle or cartridge just has a lot of meaning or importance to you, and you get particular enjoyment from using it. And like we mentioned, every single rifle the two of us used on those hunts did not have a scope. We were hunting with iron sights only. So you certainly can do that if you so choose. Indeed, iron sights are lighter and less bulky and often less fragile than a scope. And hunting with iron sights is a big improvement over hunting with a rifle with a busted scope on it, like my poor cousin Brian. But that said, there's a reason why most people hunt using a scope. And we did have to pass on some opportunities that would have been a piece of cake with a scoped 30-06, for instance, but I was using an iron-sighted 45-70 and, my dad, the 51-10, etc. There were a couple shots we just could not take, and there was also that instance where my dad shot that kudu with the guide's 7mm rim mag. With that said, though, hunting in Africa is supposed to be fun, and if bringing an unconventional rifle or chambering makes things more fun for you, then by all means do so. There are challenges and risks associated with doing so, like with Brian's bags getting delayed and him having to buy ammo in country. He was lucky he was able to find 45-70 ammo. You're not going to be able to find .33 Winchester or 5110 ammo in a random gun store in Namibia. I mean, you can't even find that in hardly any gun stores in the United States. And of course, there's the limitations I just talked about with some shots that you're not going to be able to take. But have at it if you want to. I have hunted Africa twice with my dad, once with just my wife, and then once with my wife, my mother-in-law, and my kids. All were fun hunts in their own way, but I thought it was particularly special to share that experience with other people I cared about. And like we said, my dad and I did those initial hunts 19, 20 years ago, and we're still talking about them to this day. All of those hunts, I'm sure, would have been fun if he or I would have just gone alone, but the fact that we did it together made it a lot more fun. So if you have the opportunity to hunt Africa, especially if you have the opportunity to hunt Africa with a friend or family member, I highly recommend that you do so. I can set you up with an awesome experience that you will be talking about for years after the fact as well, just like we are. Now, we are now full for all of 2025 in Africa, and we are also fully booked for June, July, and August 2026. We do still have some availability remaining for other months in 2026, though things are starting to fill up even for next year. We're off to a great start with the 2025 hunting season. Things are looking great over there. Next year is shaping up to be an amazing year as well. So visit bestsafarihunt.com for more details or email me, john@thebiggamehuntingblog.com, and I will help you book your dream hunt in Africa for buffalo, for plains game, or for both. And not to worry, I will have more Africa content for you next week as well. Remember, you can make your dream hunt turn into a reality, and we can help. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here next time on the Big Game Hunting Podcast.
This show may be over, but we have plenty more for you on our website. For more information on today's topic, as well as lots of other useful hunting resources, head over to thebiggamehuntingblog.com. We look forward to having you back for the next episode. But until then, happy hunting.